turn a page, you'll find it. But if you want to find references to Jesus as judge, you need to search. That is a very rare reference to Jesus. And it's interesting that that's something Benedict fixed on. So for me personally, it's a sign that he was very well acquainted with the scriptures. That isn't something you find just offhand. So he was well acquainted with the scriptures. But he saw the role of holding the community together was to actually come to this understanding of Jesus as judge. The abbot, then, is basically the presence and the authority of the Father, or Jesus. And this authority is over the family itself. Now, the heart of his spirituality is basically hospitality. Okay? The rule is what holds the community together. But his spirituality, like St. Augustine's was friendship, the spirituality of Benedict is in fact hospitality. Now, unfortunately, I don't know anything of Benedict's life, so I don't know how he came to it. And with these others, I can pretty well see it. But I have no idea how Benedict came to this. But I will tell you several things that went on and were well known in the early church. One thing has to do with scripture references. I wonder if you remember the story of Abraham. Abraham, typical Middle Eastern patriarch, is sitting in front of his tent, and he sees three men coming down the road. And he goes over and asks whether he can offer them hospitality, and they refuse. That's required in the Mideast. They invite you into their home, and you give a polite reason why you cannot do it. And then they insist, and then you go. And so that's sort of the way it was done. And Abraham, washed their feet from the journey, prepared them a meal, shared the meal. When you get all finished with the thing, Abraham discovers that those three people are God. And for our tradition, that's the first reference to Trinity. And so these three people, in fact, are God. Abraham will refer to them as Lord, and goes on. And you understand that in Abraham's hospitality has encountered God. Second story has to do with Tobit. Tobit, as a young man, had to go try and find an inheritance with some people who owed him some money. Owed his father some money. So Tobit went on this trip and invited a person to go with him. And the person he invited to go with him, he basically took care of that person on the trip and all this sort of thing. When the trip was over, he discovered that that person was the Archangel Raphael. So that in his dealing with him, he came into this reference. Okay? Another story. This is the story of Martin of Tours. Saint Martin of Tours became the bishop in Tours, France. Now, Tours, France is a very, very old city. And you have to understand, France was far enough removed from Rome that the great persecutions that were going on in Rome just touched France lightly, okay? So that the church really was going well in France. That's why in ancient days, before the Revolution actually, they used to talk of France as the eldest daughter of the church. It was the first place where the church really caught on. And so anyway, Tours, Martin was a member of a centurion in the Roman army, a Christian centurion in the Roman army. And he was on his way home from doing whatever centurions do. And as he was on his way home, he saw beside the road a man, a very poor man, badly clothed. One of the principal identification of a Roman centurion, if you look at a painting or anything, they wore a very elaborate red cape. And Martin took his red cape and with his sword cut it in half and gave half to the man. Martin then went home, went to bed, and during the night he had a dream. And in the dream, Jesus Christ appeared to him wearing the other half of his cape. And so he realized that in fact with that person, his hospitality and care of the person, he had encountered Jesus Christ. Incidentally, that's when he left the military, became a priest, and ultimately the bishop in France. So he took that step. Now we have those instances. There's several others in Things of Saints and several others in the Scriptures. Those are the most famous. But I'd like to read to you a passage that appears in Benedict's rule. And this is a quote from Paul's letter to the Hebrews. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect hospitality. Through it, some have unknowingly entertained angels. Be mindful of prisoners as if you are sharing their imprisonment, and of the ill-treated as you are of yourself. For we are all also in a single body. Okay? So this background led Benedict to this concept of the idea of hospitality. Now, if we are in the monastery, we are supposed to encounter God as judge, and we're supposed to encounter God as the authority in our lives through the abbot. Now, once that's done, it's the authority that holds the community together. Once that's done, we actually encounter God through hospitality to others. Now, if you were to ever experience a Benedictine abbey, and I guess probably a good example of a large Benedictine abbey close to us here would be Mount Angel in Oregon. But another one that's new and getting started is Vina, California. There's a Trappist monastery there. Remember, the Trappists are of the Benedictine tradition. And one of the major things they do is in each monastery there is an appointed individual called the guest master. And the guest master's only job is to bring guests into the community. And the reason they bring guests into the community is so people can exercise hospitality. Okay? I'll tell you a cute story sideways. I wanted to go up to Vina to make a private retreat, take a week and go up there for prayer. And so I phoned and I asked them if it would be all right if I brought the dog, Shiloh. And they said, no problem. So I arrived. When I arrived with the dog, he says, you can't bring a dog here. We don't allow dogs in the monastery. And I said, well, I phoned in. And he looked into the book. And the day I phoned, the guest master died. And one of the other monks was covering for him until a new guest master could be appointed. And so the guy who was covering didn't know you couldn't bring the dog. So I was there, so he says, well, you can keep the dog. So the dog went in, and I think you remember Shiloh. Well, Dalmatians in general are not barkers, and they didn't want a dog around because oftentimes dogs bark. And so anyway, Shiloh was very quiet. The monks raise walnuts. There are huge groves of walnuts there. That's how they support themselves. And dogs, I think you know, love anything that has protein in it. So Shiloh rather, developed a great appetite for walnuts. And he would find them. He couldn't open them. He'd bring them to me. I'd open them for him. And when I got back here after being there for the retreat, I had a letter from the abbot. And the abbot said, I noticed while your dog was here, he never made a sound. And he seems to have developed a taste for walnuts. He's welcome anytime you want to come. And we suspect he might actually have a vocation. So, he never mentioned me. Nothing. I thought I was prayerful. Nothing. But anyway, so what they do is their job is to make sure there are guests there. Benedict will tell you a couple of things. He says your best chance of encountering God is in someone who is not a Christian. Now remember, at this time the Christians are basically Catholics, okay? But what he said, and he doesn't say unbelievers, because at this time in history everyone believed. I mean, if they were atheists, they were hiding, okay? So everyone had a religion, but most people at that time were pagans. And so he says that you want to invite those people in because that is the best chance in encountering God. He says the second best chance is encountering God in sick people. And in the monastery, they would take care of the sick people there. And the monasteries evolved to the early hospitals. Okay? So they would take care of the sick people. He said the third one is the brand new people who come in, who don't know the rule or understand it or anything. And he says to really be most careful in those situations because that's where you most encounter God. He asked each monk to consciously make sure each day he encountered someone with